Thank you. Look, I think if we look back over the last 2 or 3 years, this council has had to take on more than probably any other council in the history of Christchurch, and we've done it with 13 elected members plus the mayor. I think it's fair to say that we've probably broken the back of a lot of the work post-earthquake, and I really do question whether an increase in number of councillors is actually going to make us work any more effectively. There is a fear, I think, expressed around the table that this amendment may allow election of councillors from one specific socio-economic group or one particular subdivision. I do believe in the best person for the job, and in fact, if you look at the Burwood-Pegasus ward, you talk about that in the last couple of elections, two of the elected members there came from outside of the Burwood-Pegasus ward anyway. And we have in history seen people of high profile stand for council, high profile sportsmen, etc., and have got elected in certain electorates. And I have no doubt that if Richie McCall stood for mayor, he'd probably win if he stood for the Woolston ward, he would probably get elected. So I do support the notion expressed that, you know, as elected members, we have a citywide vision. However, I do also support this notion that, and we've had it for a long time now, that we've had paired wards, we'd shared the responsibility in a bigger area, and I think it's worked very well, and I'm more than happy to support this amendment.
Phil.
Well, look, I support the combination of the 16 member wards, but I cannot support this amendment. I just see this amendment that we're discussing today, and it's the first I saw it today, it's really like making a major decision while we're running and on the hop. And I just don't think that's a good way to make decisions at all. Like it's
Sorry.
It's all right. There's more than a few problems in defining it today, and I've got no doubt there'll be a lot of problems with potential voters clarifying it too. And the way these are clustered, to me, just doesn't make sense. The different groupings, for example, and although Councillor Goff has said that in his own Fenton-Waimari ward, there's been great support for Bishopdale, when I look at the future areas, huge areas like Harewood and Maclean's, you really have to wonder how, in fact, poorer areas, for example, lower socioeconomic areas over in Harewood, how in fact they are going to get close representation from their councillors. And that is what the residents, when they were engaged with, asked for. They wanted to have closer contact with their local councillor. And this is just to me, clustering the wards this way does just simply the opposite. I also just want to comment on the comment from Councillor Jones, that in fact combining the wards actually means that you can share the workload. I'm sorry, but this representation review is not about how we share the workload. I would expect we do, no matter what electoral arrangement we have. It's actually about representing the local people in the most effective and fair way. I was certainly interested to hear the comments about what Jean Drage had made in relation to fairness, and I went back to my notes last night, and basically what she also said, I made this note, that as soon as wards are combined, you get poorer representation. And Jean Drage was the expert. She came from university. She contributed a lot to the background of this paper, and I think it's really important that as councillors that we take note of that. I'm also really concerned that, in fact, if we have these big wards, in fact, that makes it a lot more difficult for ordinary people like us to actually, or most of us, to actually stand and get elected. The wards would be huge. The way of running a campaign in such big wards would be enormous on ordinary little people. And I urge councillors to bear that in mind. I think in terms of the fairness of it too, and I will go back to my own case in Councillor Scanderitz, where in fact, you know, it isn't in my self-interest at all to, well, it would be, to keep, to go for a wider ward. And it's not in my self-interest because I live in Kashmir, like Tim does, but it's not about my interest. It's actually about making a decision which is right for the people who we represent. So, and the other point too, is that there's no question in my mind that when I see the wards combined this way, that, and it's been referred to actually, that in fact this is not just the tip of the iceberg, but it's very clearly heading towards having voting at large. Now we do that for the mayor and that works. But as history indicates, when this council, when the city had voting at large, people were poorly represented. So I think that the amendment is the opposite of best representation. It's the opposite of being fair, and it'll be the opposite of being effective. But I think having 16 councillors should work very well.
Sorry, I've got this written down somewhere. Andrew's the next.
Thank you. I will address the amendment first, and then I wanted to make some comments around the subdivisions, and then I'll talk about the 1416. And there are a number of points I want to make, but I'll keep it as brief as I can. There's one thing about the amendment that I like, and there's only one thing about the amendment that I like, and that's the single member for Banks Peninsula. But the things about the amendment that I don't like are less accountability, less representation, less democracy, less power to the people, less room for grassroots involvement, potentially lower turnout at elections, which in turn means a lower level of engagement with the democratic process and with council in general. They're all things that I really do not want to see. This further removes councillors, so the amendment, the proposed amendment, further removes the councillors from the people. It doesn't respond to the feedback that we've heard from the public. And there are two other things it does as well. It increases the cost of a campaign. The bigger the ward, and what we're talking about here is wards big enough to have 3 councillors representing them. The bigger the ward, the more the cost of running an effective campaign. That immediately rules some people out who might not have $20,000 or $25,000 just sitting in their back pocket. It also decreases the chance that a person who's been involved for that reason, in a grassroots person who's been involved in a community group or maybe even as a community board member, they may not be able to afford to run that kind of a campaign. They also may not have the visibility across a ward which is big enough to have 3 councillors to be able to be recognised as a person who might make a good councillor. And, you know, that leads to an outcome that, again, I'm not comfortable with. Because of that bigger cost, because a person needs to have the flexibility in their life to run that kind of a campaign and the sort of profile to run that kind of a campaign, that leads to people that are either rich enough or famous enough to do that being elected. I don't want to sit round a council that's full of rich and famous people. There's been some of that already, and there are arguments as to how well it worked and how well it didn't. But I would rather sit around a table here which is made up of real people from real communities who've had that grassroots experience. And this amendment, in my view, at least to an extent, precludes those people from running. On the subdivisions, we talked a little bit about the subdivisions between the Akaroa-Wairewa part of the Banks Peninsula ward and the the Wairewa part of the Banks Peninsula ward and the Akaroa part of the Banks Peninsula ward, and that works well. We've got diverse communities with different interests, different needs. We've got good local representatives from each of those communities who represent their particular needs well. So I certainly welcome, across all of the proposals, and I'll take the Hills and Littleton, or the Sumner-Littleton Community Board, depending which way we look at it. Having a Littleton subdivision there means that Littleton Harbour continues to be well represented at that Community Board table, regardless of the fact that we lose the Littleton Mount Herbert Community Board proper. It means that we can be confident that at the Community Board level, we've still got good representation. At the councillor level, we also need to have good representation, and that's why a single member for Banks Peninsula, in my view, is the only way forward. I'm the only person sitting around this table at the moment who is a single councillor representing a ward, and I've got to say it works well. And I have good relationships with the two community board chairs, and I have good relationships with the community board members. And those people tell me what I need to know to represent them well at the council table. So another point I'll make around that, and I hope it wasn't just because I was in the room at most of those meetings, but the people of the peninsula actually made similar comments when we went to them for feedback. And I imagine, given the opportunity to have good single councillor representation, people in other wards would be saying that too. All of the things I've talked about this afternoon are not in any way unique to the peninsula. The peninsula is a community just like every other community in the city. So my view is that single member wards and the 16-member model is the way to go. The reason for the 16-member model, and again I speak from the peninsula viewpoint, is because it gives the greatest level of representation around the council table for each community. From the peninsula, I would far have preferred the 19 model, but I know there's not support around the table for that, so I haven't pushed that particular envelope. But if the peninsula's got to expand into the city, if there's a danger that the rural peninsula is going to be diluted or absorbed into a larger urban community with urban interests, then I want to make sure that that dilution is as little as it can be, that there isn't the possibility that the Banks Peninsula communities can be lost or hidden in those wider urban issues. So in my view for the peninsula, the larger number of wards and the smaller number of people per ward, the better the relationship people can have with their councillor, the better the representation of those people at this table. And again, that's not unique to the peninsula. I could say that for every community across the city. So that's the reason I'm going to vote against the amendment, and I'm going to vote in favour of the 16 councillors.
Paul.
I'm going to fully support the amendment, and I'm going to fully support 14 councillors. And I just want to touch on a couple of points over and above what Councillor Jones has said, because I actually fully endorse. But first of all, I think this council and the incumbent mayor have done a great job so far, and so I really take a bit of personal effect when people start talking some of the things I've talked about here. I think the mayor would give Richard McCaw a run for his money because of the job you've been doing so far. And I think that actually highlights what this council is actually doing right at the moment, though, as
Right.
individual members. I do think we've actually broken the back of many of the issues. We've actually taken on a huge amount of work, but we actually stood up for this job knowing that. So it's not that much of an issue because we knew that's what we were going to face. I also think the dual council awards is really, really important, and I'm going to point to this current council table in particular because we got the chance of mix and balance within each of those wards. Yanni and I, we want the same thing for our constituents, but we are different people, and I think you can look around at each council ward,
we are.
and we're different people.
We women are looking very hard.
But it is about that balance around the community board table as well, and I think that's really, really important. And we talk about effective representation, and I do talk about the workload. Yes, we have a big workload on our hands as councillors, but effective representations means that we can go out to our community, and if we can't, we have a ward buddy that can actually go out there and do the job as well, and I think that's really important as well. I don't expect with more councillors my workload will drop one single bit, because I want to be at every single briefing, I want to be at every single council meeting that goes on, and I want to try and get to every single ward meeting or discussion or event to help my constituents. So I don't think it's going to change. We talk about the diminishing voice, and we have a community board, and I think our community board's doing a great job. They get out there, they're really effective, they're visible, and I think we have to remember there are other members out there aside from ourselves that actually are doing some workload, and we've got to take that into account. My biggest concern, and I think it was brought up by both Councillor Clearwater and Livingston around people who perhaps don't get represented or aren't heard from, and I think that's a really good point. Who don't we hear from? It's not just the, the disadvantaged we don't hear from. There are a large group of people out there we don't hear from, and I think they would have a different view to what we've actually heard, even through the review, even though the staff have done an absolutely outstanding job, noting how many people they've actually engaged, but there are also a chunk of people out there that do not step up and say anything. And we know through the voting records, 42% of the last election, so there is 58% we don't actually hear from. My own brother, I asked him just recently, who are your ward councillors? No, because he didn't actually care. Because he
I
doesn't...
hope he doesn't live in Hagley Ferry, mate.
He
Sorry.
doesn't live there, but I won't say which ward. Because he doesn't feel as though what he's going to say is going to have much of a change. And that's our job, to get out there and make sure that we can do that. I don't think actually reducing the size of those wards is going to change that. And you talk about people around the table, someone being rich and famous. I don't know who we're talking about here. I am an ordinary person. I think everybody around here is an ordinary person, and they have ordinary views and they live ordinary lives. And I think we actually represent our people really, really well. I think, that to talk about campaign costs, as part of this process is really what I'd call a point of order. It's not about us and our campaign costs. We stand up because, we want to go in and make a difference. And I think anybody who actually wants to step up and make a difference will have a voice, because they will be in the community and they'll make sure their voice is heard, regardless of how much they spend on a campaign. So, again, I urge you to support this recommendation. I believe that the 14 ward councillor is the right one. I think that we've got to be, fiscally responsible, and I do believe that a large amount of people don't want to see a huge amount of extra cost burdened on them through this process.
Yeah, Rap.
Yeah, interesting debate. Some people are obviously more ordinary than others around this table, which I find quite an interesting prejudice. I think there's a confusion here between the role of the community board member and the role of the city councillor. And I think that's the point Jamie is trying to make. The city councillor has the role of representing the whole city, not just their community board. I think what's been come through clearly in this process is at the community board level, people want that effective local representation. And that, I know personally, I've been talking about that for ages, that local decisions need to be made by local people. But the city has a different perspective, and I can give you an example myself, having got involved in New Brighton recently. It's not my ward. I don't live there, don't have a lot to do with it. And I was called by people over there who were not happy with some of the representation they did have to come and get involved and get stuff going. And that's what I did, and that's what's happened. So as a city councillor, we have a very, very wide view, not just of our local communities. And I think the effective representation for the city is very different to the effective representation for communities. And I think also, this as Glenn was saying, this talk about, certain streets or people not being represented, Hooper Avenue, I've worked there for years. I know the area very well, worked with refugee communities in that area as well, and I kind of resent that implication. So I think we've got to be careful here to not worry too much about where people are living when they're representing the whole city. Yes, as far as the community boards go, we want people from those specific areas, and we want more powers and responsibilities given to those people. So I think we're making a little bit of a meal of this. It's actually pretty much the situation that we have now. And I don't see that it's actually a big deal. And I think some of the inference and prejudices expressed here are frankly wrong. So I support the amendment. I support very strong representation at the local level, and I'm very supportive of more focused community board elected representatives. And I think hopefully over time we can develop that so that they're actually taking on a lot more power and responsibility. And the city councils are really just dealing with the big city issues, which really anyway, it shouldn't matter where you live. But I think as long as there is good representation from around the city in general, this isn't a big city. I know my ward very well from top to bottom. I can drive through it in 15 minutes. So, I think the idea that we have to have city councillors elected from specific wards is not as important as having the community members. So that's why I'm supporting this.
Very good. Tim?
Thank you. I'm going to speak first to the 16 and the 14. I seconded the second option 2, which is the 16, because I absolutely believe that it's now more important than ever in the history of the city that we get good representation for our residents, our ratepayers. We've had some really good work done by our staff, and Yanni, I do commend you for the work that was done. And there's no question that this work was outstanding, and the information that was gained from it is very accurate. And the feedback is that people want to have more connection with its elected members. I get a lot of calls from local businesses because I am their local councillor, as I'm sure Phil does too. With regards to the people around this table, we all have different qualities and professions, if you like. And that can really help when you're in your wards. So if one's got a more specific knowledge in something, you can rely on each other to sort out those issues for your constituents, and that's the bottom line. It's not about the cost of running an election, it's actually about representation. The comment with regards to people thinking that we've pretty well broken its back, I think we've achieved a lot, but I think we've got actually a hell of a lot more to go. And it's now more important than ever that those items that need to be dealt with, those issues that need to be dealt with, as we're focusing on our suburban communities, such as in our wards, Sydenham's, Spraden Shops, etc., that we have more support for those groups and our staff working on those with our communities. So I'm definitely supporting option 2. As for the amendment, I'm not sure. I'll have to think about that a wee bit more and listen to some debate. So,
Yep.
Thank you.
Vicky?
Thank you. I haven't yet made up my mind on the amendment either. I remember actually when I was at high school, I got to count the votes in the City Council election, as a whole lot of people did, and it was pre-wards, and everybody who got elected basically had a name that started with A, B or C from from a large list of names that clearly did not necessarily evoke special reactions amongst people. And it was interesting to look at a council that was basically from one part of town, fairly homogenous, and interesting, and with a lot of A's, B's and C's on it. So later, when I got more involved, more interested in local government and involved, I decided I would do my thesis on local government in Christchurch, on who pays, who governs and who benefits. So I started on the work on who pays in terms of the local government finance, and then decided that I should ask the professor if I can do such a thesis for political science. And he told me, no, it's clearly not political science, it's sociology. So my thesis became only about local government finance, and so I've never quite found out who governs and who benefits from local government in Christchurch.
Is that when you change your name from Vicky Zoolander to Vicky Bowman?
Yeah. But I have to say, as I watched in the Local Government Commission, which I was involved in the changes in before 1989, and it was in the South Island, I watched as counties we tried to drag them out from almost feudal times, where basically grandfathers passed on their seat on the council to their grandsons actually, and complained because commissioners turned up wearing trousers. If they were female. But it was interesting to see what actually can happen if you don't structure local government in such a way that people feel that they are hugely involved in their town or their district. So I've always favoured wards. I think they have transformed the nature of representation in Christchurch, and I totally favour them. But they need to represent some sort of logical community, particularly if they involve also a community board. I have no problems with community boards having as much power as we can possibly give to them. I prefer it. And for myself, I don't like single-member wards because I think there is always a risk that some areas miss out from good representation, just by accident actually. So I actually prefer double-member wards so that the risk of that is minimised. But the difficulty I have in the amendment, so I don't like the motion, I don't like the amendment. because I actually like 2 members per ward. And the difficulty I have with this amendment is that it combines areas that I doubt would have combined themselves logically. So the concerns I have particularly are around Woolston Central and Linwood, because I don't think these combinations have come from those own natural community creation statistics. It's how they would feel themselves, how they would naturally align themselves. I may be wrong on that, and I appreciate that this at least gets to go out for consultation, but I'm stuck between the 1-member wards, which I don't like, and the 3-member ones, which don't make sense here. So I'm not sure how I'm voting on that. In terms of the 16-14, I'm entirely pragmatic. One costs 414,000 more, and one costs slightly less than now. So I'll go for the one that costs slightly less than now, which is the 16-member option. So I'm left sort of betwixt and between in terms of the amendment, because the communities that are expressed here are not what I think the community itself would see as logical communities. But I don't like the single-member one either, because I don't like single-member wards. So I might just have to vote with Tim on this one.
Leanne, can you clarify, can those boundaries change and stuff, or are they fixed? So my understanding was that once this goes out for discussion, that can alter slightly.
Well, we can
change.
hear the submissions and hear, but we've got to release.
No, I understand
a
that,
proposal.
But what you're saying, Vicky, is that may change.
But we are putting up a proposal now.
I understand that. Okay.
I mean, I suppose, and I know I'm interrupting the debate, which I shouldn't do, and to ask a question, but is it possible in the context of between now and the actual resolution coming back in, 2 weeks' time, is it possible to look at whether some of the mix of the wards could change? Or is that not possible?
What the consultation's about too, part of that.
Not the boundaries, but actually the mix.
The mix, yeah.
It's possible.
So, okay.
But it would be very difficult if you didn't make a decision when it
No,
comes
I
back.
know. So we'd need to be able to make a decision. So, so anyway, Pauline, you were next.
Thank you. Well, I think it's pretty much all been said, and that's what I was going to begin with too, just to remind everyone we are just putting out a proposal at the moment, and I congratulate the staff on the pre-engagement. That's very proactive, and we've had a bit of a steer from people on that. So we heard that people are wanting more representation, which is why I support 16 councillors. That will give us a better representation at around closer to the national average, which is 16,500. That'll take us to 1 to 19 and 20,000. And the thing is that if we look at this from a resident's perspective as well, not just from a councillor perspective, to have more councillors standing in a single wards actually makes it easier for people to get to know us. And when they want to know us is when something goes wrong. And that makes it much easier for them to reach us, to connect with us and to communicate with us as councillors. And I think that's really important. We had a comment about if it ain't broke, but the thing is we're obliged to do this, and we're obliged to because of Banks Peninsula and because of the earthquake population shifts, and we have to make sure the wards are within plus or minus 10% of each other. We've heard of, there's a confusion I think too about the role of a city councillor when we talk about strengthening community boards, but we're not handing everything over to community boards. We need to be representing our wards as councillors. I don't know if people have a picture of us as councillors going to be sitting up here just tweaking numbers. No, we must stay connected to our wards and our people. We come to this council table, what's funny, Vicky, and we also go into bat for our wards. Now look at this morning with the Hornby traffic issue. When I came in here, I was actually wanting to support the staff recommendation. But listening to the local councillors and putting their views and their community board's views, they went into bat for their community, and that's what you do. So we all put our, lens on the city as well, but still came out supporting the local councillors. So I think it's really important that we retain that link with our communities and we don't just become city councillors sitting around this table in this room. And that's why I will support, I'm not supporting the amendment, and I support 16 councillors and 16 wards, individual councillors in each ward. Thank you.
Jimmy.
It's very difficult, to make decision. But in perception, I prefer, this kind of amendment. But in rational, I cannot support it because at the moment our situation is still different from the like Auckland Council. Auckland, we are all aware, citywide, all councils just make decisions regarding to the citywide issue, or concern, etc. Regarding local issue, all rely on the local board, and also local board make decision, and the whole council cannot override this kind of situation. But if we review the central government, the member parliament election, they have focused on each electorate is also the one kind of member parliament, MP, is rather than 2 or 3, etc. Why? Because to make the constituent fully aware who is there, the local and the member of parliament. But central government election, they have an advantage than us is because they have a kind of the party list. If you are in the top list, you are eligible, highly possibility to be get in, you can contribute to yourself. But all the at the moment structure, our policy at the moment still show for this situation. So that's why the council, one council on behalf of your area, that's the most important. Let your kind of the local the people realize you are there the local issue. But however, in the last, I'm the second term councillor, quite a few issues actually is not in relation to any local issue. That's the kind of citywide issue. So absolutely, we make the decision is focused on this citywide. However, some of the issue is local. If a local one, if you are local councillor, you are fully aware of the local situation. Because while every day you listen from the local people, local electorate, etc. So to me, I still would like to repeat. In perception, maybe this one. Why? Because it's wider area. Even it's possible for me to be a number 1. But if I'm number 2 or number 3, well, I still have a possibility to get in. But I cannot just consider my personal the interest, because we are aware, because in the whole city, we still have more or less some area is high economic social area, some area is a medium or low social economic area. So each area should have their kind of local elected member, the local councillor, on their behalf to bring to the council table. So that's the very, very crucial and important. But regarding to the 14 and 16, because I appreciate the staff, give us the comprehensive report, because I only consider one issue is because a moment we showed for the funding, but we review the 16 single council and the 14 one. It looks like 16 is more cost effective because we can save, the almost 900,000 the money, and also can play this kind of job, can fulfill our responsibility. So I would like to support the 16 council, and today it's difficult for me to support the amendment. Thank you.
Good. Oh, before I call Yanni to close the debate, I just want to remind members, and I thought I'd just use the local government New Zealand, how to stand as a candidate or standing as a candidate, just to remind people of just how councils are intended to operate in terms of council decision making. Generally, elected members hold particular views on certain issues and often campaign on them. It is these views that are endorsed by the community at election time. However, after the election, elected members are required to recognise and consider the views of all residents and ratepayers in their council, local board or community board area when they make decisions. In making decisions, they must have an open mind with no bias. Successful elected members balance the mandate provided by their electors with the need to make decisions on behalf of the whole community and future generations. And so the argument that is put to us is that when we sit around this council table, we do take an overview of the city. Of course, we're influenced by our experience of our areas that we live in and associate within. But I don't have to be elected by the Burwood Pegasus ward to know that, to know what the issues are there. I live there. I've represented that area in a different capacity for a very long time. So it's not, it is an ability to separate the two. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't sit around this table as representatives. We do. It's a representative democracy. So I don't think anyone should think that this is like a board of directors where people just make decisions that are in the best interest and uninfluenced in any way. But you're not representing the individual ward interests when you sit here. You're representing the interests of the city as a whole, even though you are influenced by your experience. My issue around the wards, and this is why I've struggled with this issue for so long, I look around this table and I don't actually see a very diverse group of people. And it is diversity in decision making that enables us as humans to deal with extremely complex issues. I actually don't agree we've broken the back of anything. We have a long way to go as a city, and actually the people of Christchurch are asking us as a council to step up and be ready to take back the leadership that they've been looking for from us for a very, very long time, a long time before any one of us was elected. So the point that I'm making is that we need to think about this as a strategic decision that will be influenced ultimately by the submissions that we hear. We absolutely have to get a proposal out in the public arena. Once we've made the decision here today, we don't have to feel compelled to vote that way after we hear from people, but we need to be able to get those views on board. And this is the way to do it. I think that it's a shame, and again, it's what we've inherited, but it's an inheritance that dates back to a very difficult decision that was made by the Local Government Commission back in 2004. And in that time, it decided to merge two wards together, and it made the decision. It was not a grassroots movement to do that, and it was simply to reduce the number from 24 to 12. My view at the time was that yes, 24 was too many to be an effective governance body for the city, but 12 was too few to provide for the diversity that you actually do need to have around the table. And it isn't just a gender diversity, it is every element of diversity. And actually, Raf and Jimmy bring to this table a diversity that you don't see in other parts of the South Island of New Zealand. And we have not one Māori member elected to this council, not one Pacifica member. In fact, I think in our history, I think there's been one Pacifica member, Louisa Crawley, who was elected as a councillor. So, you know, I mean, I just think that we need to think more about the need for diversity in decision making, tackling the wicked problems. And so I keep getting back to the question about how do we improve the diversity in terms of decision making, how do we ensure that different parts of our city feel like that they have a voice at this table, even though the representative elements are far more obvious at the community board level. I also worry about the point that Yanni made, and deep down that's what bothers me, and that is that we could put into place, and we will put in place, the very best delegations that will enable local communities to be in charge of their own decision making. But the truth is that the next council could completely overturn it. And that is the one thing that bothers me. And I would much rather get to a situation where the government would allow a council like ours to develop to develop local boards in the way that Auckland has, with their own budgets, with their own responsibility, and not accountable to the council per se, but accountable to their communities for the decisions they made. And the only way that we can access the local board structure is if we amalgamate. Well, I'm not going to force Christchurch City on Waimakariri. They don't deserve that right now. They're very busy with their own recovery components, and I'm sure Selwyn would feel exactly the same way. I think that we should continue to work collaboratively with Selwyn and Waimakariri as we are doing through the UDS, but I think that we need to be talking to central government about the need to trust this city to develop a local board model that would work for Christchurch. And that, I think, would resolve the problem for me. So my issue is around diversity supporting decision making. I really look forward to hearing what the people of Christchurch have to say with whatever option we put out for consideration, and that we all approach that with an open mind.